a lot of people don't want to say burnout because burnout, I think a lot of people kind of think that that means they failed at something, which isn't true at all. And that's one of the myths that I'm trying to kind of unwrap and unravel. But words like overwhelmed, tired, fatigued, exhausted, those types of words usually are stressed. Those are code words that, if it doesn't mean they're already burned out, it means they're heading that way. So those are definitely words to pay attention to if your team starts saying them.
Thank you for stopping by Nurture Small Business Podcast. I am your host, Denise Cagan. If you're looking for stories that lift up women business owners, both in their personal and professional lives, you are at the right place. As always, if you like what you hear on today's podcast, please share it. You have my gratitude for doing so. Today, I have with me an expert on burnout. Now, I know you guys out there listening have no idea what burnout is, right? Okay, that's the best I get at sarcasm. So, stress, burnout, is it the same? I don't know. Our guest today is going to tell us all about that. Welcome to the show, Julie B.
Denise, thanks for having me on here. I'm really excited to have this conversation and help your audience with burnout.
Absolutely. So I am super excited as well. You've been in business. How long have you been in business? 15-ish years?
So it'll be 16 in September. Yeah. So
Okay. And your first company, what were you doing there?
my first company was a social media marketing agency, ran that for 15 years and exited last fall.
Okay. All right. Why'd you exit?
Burnout. Bottom line. I mean, there were a lot of things going on. I had a really epic burnout that happened in 2021 that sent me to the emergency room. It was a panic attack. Thought I was having a heart attack. So many business owners have a similar story like that. But uh, it was the type of burnout. It was coming from something that I wasn't going to be able to fix, which was the industry of social media itself. For for 15 years, I was kind of the go-to expert, or one of the go-to experts in that field. And I just got to the point where I could not keep up with things anymore. I didn't really want to. And there was a lot of values misalignment for me as well with the way the industry had changed. And I had to make the tough decision to, it was really down to my health versus staying in an industry that was just chewing me up. I mean, there's no other way to describe it.
No, I get it. And for the record here, I've actually seen someone have a panic attack that thought it was a heart attack. I mean, I've actually witnessed that it was my father. And it's quite scary. It is very scary just from those looking on and those having that situation. So, well, kudos to you for making that decision. So in the wake of all that, tell me a little bit about what you did to heal yourself.
Yeah, so I basically, right after that, at the time I had a team of 6 people working for me at my marketing agency. So first things first, I basically told them what had happened and told them I needed them to run the business for a few weeks while I got my feet back under me. And they did, which was awesome. So first lesson is always have some type of support team set up for yourself because you never know when you're going to need it, and as a business owner. But then after that, I did a lot of self-reflection, a lot of just evaluation of what was going on in the industry. And, at that time, I mean, we had just come off of like COVID and George Floyd's murder, and we were going through the election. And then we were dealing with, I mean, all of the stuff that had happened between 2020 and 2020, summer of 2021, all of the things that happened. We were managing not only how we were handling it, but how 30 to 40 clients handled it as well in a public arena on social media. So I just had to do a lot of self-reflection, and finally came to the conclusion that the industry wasn't for me and I needed to get out of it before I had an exit strategy in place, but had to start working on getting out of that industry. And then in that process, I documented what I did. I documented how I went through that burnout because I knew I was burned out. that's the crazy thing is like even leading up to the panic attack, I had known that I was burned out, and I kept telling myself if I can just get through, there were some things
Mm.
going on that I was like, if I can just get through this, or if I can just get through that, then I'll be okay. And the reality is that you can't outrun burnout. That's the big thing that I've learned. If you're saying that type of stuff, you're just eventually it's all going to catch up with you. So yeah, I mean, I figured out what my red flags were, what my triggers were, um, figured out how to address the problem that was causing me to burn out,
Mhm.
and then, put that plan in action basically. And then I ultimately created myself a prevention plan so that I wouldn't hopefully burn out again.
Okay. So burnout, stress.
Hmm.
I'm I've read a little bit about your books. I
Yeah.
have an idea, but
Hmm.
talk to our audience. What's the difference?
Yeah, and there's a lot of debate about this. This is how I put it simply. Stress is something you can see the end to. So if you are there, there's also a manageable level of stress I think we all carry that just feels like, you're not going to have a breakdown. It's something that you can manage through. And usually there is, like, you can see the end point to something. For some people, it's, if you're a parent and you have children, sometimes it's the end of summer or sometimes it's the end of the school year, just depending on, how you have things set up. With burnout, what I find mostly is that business owners cannot see the end to it. Like it's just this never ending pile of stress that actually keeps building, that they just don't see the end. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. It's just how they show up every day. It's what they expect to show up into every day. And all of that kind of causes burnout. So they really don't have a fix for it. That's really where I see the difference between burnout and stress.
Okay. So one of the things you mentioned about if I can just get through,
Mhm.
we do that about twice a year, but I don't feel like it's burnout.
Yeah.
We have this is one of the months, July
Mhm.
and January, where we
Mhm.
do evaluations
Mhm.
for our team. And that just winds up being a heavier month. So we manage it, but
Mhm.
it is definitely more stressful. I don't feel like we're burnt out at all.
Yeah.
But we definitely use the phrase sometimes, okay, we just need to get through this.
Mhm.
Okay. And then we put some other things on hold. The
Mhm.
stress increases a bit and then we're done and move on.
Yeah.
So what would you say about something like that?
Well, you have an end in sight. You know that it's the end of July, of January, then you'll be past those moments. So I think what happens is, so if you find yourself like in February, for example, saying, I just need to get through whatever the next project is, then that's when I would become concerned, because it's what I find when people are using that. And that may not be, I mean, some people, for me, that's a trigger. And for a lot of people who, or a red flag, I'm sorry, people who are reading my book, they're actually saying, I actually feel called about that because I do that all the time. And so it's like for you specifically, Denise, if you went into, let's say, August, and then there was something else that came up and you were like, okay, now I just have to get through this. So it's if that continues and it's always, I just have to get through this now, or I just have to get this done, or if that's a continuous thing that you say or that your team says, that's when I would be concerned. But because you have bookends around, that stressful time. And you're also practicing something I talk about, which is pausing other initiatives while you're dealing with, whatever it is that could potentially cause burnout, or those just have to get through things. That's one thing that I think, you're already doing that. So that's great. And you're probably okay.
Gotcha. I feel like I've grown in that area and being able to pause initiatives.
Mhm.
That's not something that comes naturally to me. I'm kind of A type and I'm like, yes, let's get it done. However, when you have a team and they're starting to use words like fatigue and overwhelm, and I know those were some of your words
Mhm.
in the book, I started pausing things on them and saying, okay, this is not something that needs to be done right now. Let's focus on this.
A lot of the code words are a lot of people don't want to say burnout, because burnout, I think a lot of people kind of think that that means they failed at something, which isn't true at all. And that's one of the myths that I'm trying to kind of unwrap and unravel. But words like overwhelmed, tired, fatigued, exhausted, those types of words usually are stressed. Those are code words that if it doesn't mean they're already burned out, it means they're heading that way. So those are definitely words to pay attention to if your team starts saying them. And then, yeah, one of the things that I always advise the business owners who have teams that I work with to do is, when you've got a project coming up or you have something new, I think one of our jobs as leaders to help our teams not burn out is to help our teams reprioritize, you know, and I think we've lost track of how much input it takes to get the output you want in a lot of the cases. And you probably haven't because this is kind of what you do and you're very aware of project workflow and that type of thing. But I think it's really important that when you put something on somebody's plate, that when you delegate something to someone, that you also have a conversation about like where in their priority list that goes, so that they're not always thinking that everything's on fire all the time. And that can help mitigate burnout for your team.
We actually have to have that conversation with clients occasionally.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like, which, and I mean, with, with what I mean, I went through this as in my marketing agency. I was like, okay, we were working on these five things. You want to add a sixth thing out of, the five things, which gets deprioritized now. And that's part of saying no, that's part of pushing back, and that's part of setting boundaries. And I think one of the best things we can do as leaders is model that for our teams so that they know we respect their time and their boundaries. And also in your example, you modeling that for your team will help them have that conversation with the clients when it needs to happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about stress and burnout. You also mentioned chronic burnout and acute burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so acute burnout is something that usually shows up when there's some type of event that happens, and it could be your personal life or your work life. That's the one thing about, I think, traditional definitions of burnout that bothers me, especially the WHO's definition. It specifically calls it a workplace phenomenon. It doesn't even think that our personal lives could cause burnout, which
Oh,
is
heck yeah.
hilarious, which is like, okay, whatever. Um, but they literally just put that out in 2019. So anyways, that's a
I mean, what
difference.
do they think divorces are made of?
Yeah,
Chronic burnout.
it's yeah. So burnout is one of these things that all of it, and if work is off, your life is going to be off. And if life is off, your work is going to be off. Like it's
Hmm.
just the nature of how we work today. But acute burnout, the one good thing about acute burnout is you usually know exactly what causes it, because what I kind of share in that is, you're bouncing around, you have a fairly manageable, normal amount of stress, and then there's some type of event that happens. So I've heard everything from, key employee that's been with a company for 15 years just suddenly resigns, to uh two of my parents, my mom and my husband's dad just got diagnosed with Alzheimer's within the same week. Like, these are events that happen that no matter how well you're managing stress, it can put you into acute burnout. So usually there is an event that happens. And so that makes it a little bit easier to deal with, because at least like, this is the thing that I need to address because this is the thing that put me into burnout. Now, chronic burnout is trickier. Chronic burnout is the stuff that just builds up over time. So it's kind of the things that you just get used to doing day in and day out. It's the hustle and the grind of running a business. It's, if you have an employee that kind of wears on you, you just kind of get used to dealing with them over the course of, however much time you decide to tolerate that. And that it's a little bit more difficult to unwind that one, because that can come from all different sources, and it usually impacts all different parts of your life as well. So, with that, I have some steps that I go through to try to pinpoint like what is causing that. Um, but that one is usually you've been dealing with burnout for longer than 6 months. And a lot of the times, I mean, I've seen people in chronic burnout who didn't realize they were in chronic burnout until they had been in it for 3 or 4 years. And usually for a lot of us, there's a health event that happens. There's a panic attack hospital room visit. There's, an emergency surgery. There's a relationship falling apart. Like, these are unfortunately, the first time a lot of people go through chronic burnout, they have kind of those massive events that happen that wake them up to what's been going on.
So you said you have steps. Can
Hmm.
you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I'm looking for what the cause of chronic burnout is, and what I suggest to people go through is, you're going to look at, first of all, how long have you been feeling? Like, I think the one of the best things you can do is try to identify how long you have been feeling a certain way. And it's a little bit difficult, but the flip side question I asked that was, when's the last time you were really happy?
Mm,
So I'll ask, like, if a client is having a hard time understanding like when it started, I'll ask them, when's the last time that you can really remember being happy and fulfilled in your business? And so that's sometimes where you can kind of start to see, okay, when did this start? And I think that's important because you can kind of go back and look at, okay, what happened around that time. So that's one way you can kind of figure out what's going on with your or what's causing your chronic burnout. The other thing that I see, cause chronic burnout for business owners is they have a lack of progress in their business despite like working really hard at it. So if, you can look to see if that's what's going on. Like, have you been doing the same thing, or have you been working really hard at your business for a couple of years and you're not really making any progress? That's something that we need to look at. And then you got to ask the fulfillment question, are you getting fulfillment out of work? And then, I also look for, one thing we're great at is setting unrealistic expectations on ourselves. And that can actually, that's caused burnout for me personally, where I was like, I'm going to make X dollars this year. And then as the year goes on, I'm not getting anywhere near that. And it's because I set ridiculous expectations for myself. At my mind at the time, they weren't ridiculous, but at the time, going in, it was like, okay, Julie, this should not have been your goal, but it became your goal because you thought you could achieve it. So, anyways, there's just some stuff there that I look for. And then to actually like dig into it, I I have people get away from whatever. So if going into work makes them feel stressed, I recommend you just step away from that for even like half a day. Go somewhere where you're not going to be stressed. Um, and then start to think about like, what did you actually escape? Like, what were you actually escaping? So if you go from if you don't go where you are stressed and you go to, let's say, your backyard or a best friend's house, or, just somewhere for half a day where you typically are pretty calm. What were you escaping? And, why were you escaping? Why were you escaping it? What feelings were coming up for you? And then how do you like what was causing those feelings? And a lot of the times that just stepping away from where you feel you're most stressed can help you also start to identify what is causing that chronic burnout and start to, make a plan for it. And it's one of those things that it's usually more than one thing. But there's usually like a starting point where you were happy with work and then you made a decision and things started to unravel from there. And that's the point that I'm usually looking for when I'm helping businesses go through this, because usually there is a point in time. It just happened so long ago and so many decisions have been made since then that it's hard for them to see, oh, it was that point right there where I made that decision right there to change something in my business. And that's where it all started.
that makes sense. So, as you were explaining your
Mhm.
steps, you mentioned you asking clients. You do consulting around this.
Mhm.
You not just an author. You've started consulting people, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I consult people, everyone burnout, and consulting people with burnout it's interesting because I never tell somebody they're burned out. Like, it's one of those things that, well, number one, I'm not a doctor or a lawyer, HR professional, anything like that. So I don't feel like I can diagnose somebody with burnout, but I can help them kind of see it themselves. And so I do consulting around this. And a lot of the times I'll tell you, what's interesting in this work is the answer is not for business owners specifically, the answer is often not taking breaks. The answer is often reprioritizing to get to the right actions that they need to be taking every day. And then helping them delegate and helping them figure out like what they actually don't need to do anymore versus what they do need to keep on their to-do list. So a lot of it, when I first started writing the book, I thought the research would just be like, yeah, you just take a vacation, or yeah, you just take a break. That's not what fixes burnout. It's action, but the right types of action that really helps people get through burnout. And that's one of the things that I consult on and strategize on with my clients.
Yeah, because if you take a vacation and come back and those same emotions are there, you've only just taken a vacation.
Yeah, there's a lot of feelings around that too. Like people feel guilty because they took it, and people will feel guilty because they took a vacation when their business was in a state that they were worried about. So they'll feel like, well, I wasn't actually on vacation, but I wasn't there, but I wasn't really here either, that type of thing. So yeah, I always try to get people through the initial addressing the problems that cause burnout before they start to personally recover from burnout. And I would put vacation in the bucket of, one of the things you might be able to do to help you recover if you can take it, within a reasonable amount of time. But I typically put vacation in the prevention plan for burnout bucket. That's where I like vacations to be.
Prevention plan. Ooh, I like the sound of that. Okay,
Yeah,
shifting
sure.
gear ever so slightly.
Yeah.
How hard was it to write a book?
It was hard. So I'll tell you, I've been working on this book since October of 2021. So that's like we're going on 3 years at this point. I mean, we're recording this early July of 2024. So, yeah, it was about a 3-year journey to just get it out into the world. And there was a lot that went into that. I actually had two book deals. I forget this because I went with the traditionally published book deal, but I had two different book publishers wanting to publish my book. Getting to that point was interesting. I mean, I basically got a bachelor's degree in book publishing as a small business owner and as a thought leader most of 2020, early 2022. I feel like I did a bunch of studying on the publishing industry. So it was hard, but I'm so glad I went the route that I went with the traditional publisher that I went with, because they've been phenomenal. I've had just been a fantastic experience, and almost every day, there's something new. Like I can't even begin to tell you how many times, like I'll get up in the morning and then the next thing you know, especially with the book launching recently, I'll have an email from my publisher that's like, your book is on the end cap at Powell's bookstore out in Portland, Oregon, which was like this huge deal.
Oh, yeah.
Or you're going to be the narrator for your audiobook. Let's get you in the studio for 3 weeks or 3 days.
Is Powell's that like warehouse bookstore?
It's the City of Books. It's the huge bookstore out in Portland.
I've been
Yeah,
there. It is
a lot
enormous.
like it was, and I had nothing to do with that. Well, I mean, obviously I wrote the book, but like my publisher got my book in there. So it's been a really interesting, I'm a business nerd. I just love business models and learning about like how businesses actually do business. So I think a lot of people I could see where a lot of people would be frustrated by the traditional publishing process. But for me, it was like, ooh, let me learn about this new process, this entirely new business concept that I have no exposure to, that now I'm like deep in and experiencing. I don't know. It's been a lot. It was hard, but it's been a lot of fun for me as well.
It seems like going with a traditional publisher is way more conducive to sales than doing self-publishing, which is what I hear a lot of small business owners doing.
I think that when people ask me, because I get asked now, and actually I do a little bit of, I'll do like a 1 hour strategy session with somebody and just share the knowledge that I learned. There's three models of publishing. There's self, there's hybrid, and there's traditional. And my first book offer was with a hybrid publisher, which was, a good offer, but there were things about the contract that I didn't love. So it just wasn't the right model for me. Um, I, I like traditional publishing because it gives you a level of credibility that I haven't seen with self-published books. I know that from experience because when I was running my marketing agency, I worked with a couple of authors that self-published. And I mean, I think self-publishing is a great route for a lot of business owners. I think mainly because traditional publishing is so hard and takes so long to get your book out into the world. If you don't have 3 years to wait on your book to get out into the world, then self-publishing is probably the route you need to go. But with self-publishing wasn't right for me because I felt like I needed a party that had a very serious vested interest in the success of the book. And that's what I got with a traditional publisher. So they are working sales channels. They are running Amazon ads. They are doing a lot to sell the book. They're doing a lot to support me in selling the book. And the other thing I would say is, like, I was able to reach out to our local bookstore here in Charlotte, Park Road Books, and like right away schedule an event. No problem scheduling an event. And it was because my book was traditionally published and available on a distribution channel that has it's the Penguin Random House distribution channel. So because of that, I was able to book an event there, no problem. And the same thing with local Barnes and Noble stores. Pick up the phone, talk to the manager and get that set up. And because they're already stocking it, because it's on a distribution channel, it's a no-brainer for them to have a local author, come in and do an event to try to help sell books there. So for me, I think, while it's true, if you self-publish, you get to keep all the profit pretty much. With traditional publishing, I think there's just a lot of benefits that come with it, but you gotta be willing to wait 3 years to get your book out. That's pretty standard. And, you gotta be willing to hear, like, the covers that you want, Julie, are going to make your book look like young adult fiction. I mean, I literally heard that feedback. So, if you want, it just depends on what you're using your book for. But I definitely don't recommend traditional publishing to everybody, but I think it does give you credibility in a lot of ways that self-publishing does not.
Excellent. And that's fascinating. So, Julie, how can our listeners find you after the show?
Yeah, the best way is to go to my website. It's thejuliebee.com, TheJuliebee.com. And you can connect with me there. And I'm also on LinkedIn under that same handle. Those are the two best ways to find me.
Perfect. And we'll make sure all of that is in the show notes as well.
Great.
Thanks for being here, Julie.
Thanks for having me, Denise. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me for today's podcast, where I focus on women in business and how we can be allies to one another. Please rate us on the podcast app that you listen to the most, and send me any ideas you have for podcast topics or any other feedback. I love to hear from my listeners. You can reach me at Denise@dcavirtual.com.